Ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, we're also pleased to have joining us this morning to Dr. Hans Kaufmann, who is well known by every one of us. In fact, almost every work presented at this conference has indexed his work already. Dr. Hans Kaufmann is Associate Professor at the Institute of Software Technology and Interactive Systems at Vienna University of Technology and head of the Virtual Reality Group since 2005. During his PhD thesis, he developed Construct 3D, an educational dynamic 3D geometry software in augmented reality. After completing his PhD thesis in 2004 on geometry education with augmented reality, he did postdoc research in the European Union FP5 e-learning project Lab at Future. He conducted research on training special abilities in augmented reality and virtual reality, and participated in projects in the field of virtual reality, tracking mobile augmented reality, tangible interaction, medical VR and AR applications, real-time tracing, radiated walking, geometry, and educational mathematics software. His habilitation was on application of mixed reality, with a major focus on educational mixed reality applications. He has acted on behalf of the European Commission as a project reviewer, participated in European Union projects in FP5 and FP7, managed over 10 national research projects, and published more than 60 scientific papers up to date. Dr. Kaufmann will now deliver the following keynote speech about his career in research and development of virtual technologies, 15 years of VR, AR in education, personal summary and outlook. Ladies and gentlemen, please give an applause to Dr. Hans Kaufmann.
Thank you very much for the introduction. It's an honor to be here. Thank you very much, Jorge, for inviting me. Muchas gracias. So I would like to share with you today my experience since I'm working in the field of virtual and augmented reality for about 15 years. I would like to share my experiences with you. And first I would like to give a very personal, brief history, how I started into this field, what my motivation was, and 2 projects that I've worked on. And then I would like to describe what are the challenges of these technologies, why are they not used by lots of people in mainstream education nowadays, and to give an outlook, what can the future bring us. If we look at the current program of this conference, there are many interesting, exciting papers, but in the early days there were not many people working in this field. So if we look back, one of the most cited works is by Chris from 1996. He developed Pauling world, Maxwell world, Newton world for physics. And a few years later, Maria Russos did work with children. And in her work in this biology application, she found out that many of the technology was not really suited for children. The shutter glasses were too big, they fell from the head of the children, and they also discovered in this cave environment breaks in presence. So when they were talking to these children from outside, the children lost focus, they turned around and they forgot what they did before, so they had needed some time to get back into the environment. So they used avatars to talk to the children in this environment. This was very early work where they found out about main problems when working with children. In 2000, Gustav Taxen developed this cybermath environment where he displayed mathematical surfaces and you could change parameters of surfaces and change the environment. And fundamental work in augmented reality was done by Mark Billinghurst, who developed the Magic Book, which was also mainly developed for educational purposes, where the book is used with markers or images in this book, and they are recognized and content can be seen in this book. We see this many times nowadays with other technologies. So these were the early times, and I started working on Construct 3D at the end of '99. I originally studied mathematics and geometry, and I wanted to become a teacher. But then I had this idea. I gave lots of private lessons to students, and I saw that many students have difficulties with spatial imagination, with spatial abilities. And I thought, how could I help these students? And so I started developing Construct 3D, which is a dynamic geometry application. So here we see the user putting on the head-mounted display. And this is the menu system. We have a tablet and a pen, and you can click through the menu. It's quite intuitive, like pull-down menus. And two students can collaborate, and everything is dynamic here. You can pick a point, you can move it, and you can see how the scene changes in real time. So students can study intersections of objects. It supports Boolean operations. Here you see an intersection through this part of a cylinder, of a cone. And also rotational surfaces. You can pick a point, you can change it, you can walk around objects. Here is the shadow casting. We have a light source here, and this light source casts a shadow, and we see the shadow on this plane. And we did studies with students, with over 500 students in all those years. We did a new project, we did 2 national projects. And this was also a distributed system. So here is one student working in one lab and another student working in another lab. They share the same virtual scene. They can both work on the same virtual object. And here we see a triangle on a sphere, a spherical triangle, and the sum of the angles is always larger than 180 degrees. So in the plane you have 180, and here you always have larger angles, and students can explore these properties. So the application supported a lot of features. You had basic 2D and 3D primitives, intersections, Boolean operations, and so on. But the most important feature was that everything was dynamic. You could pick any point, move it, and see the changes in real time. And this gave a lot of possibilities for education, to study and learn. And we put a lot of work into the design of this environment. So we had this tablet, we had the pen with one button, and we designed it specifically for our environment. And the reason why we put so much work into the design was that we wanted the application to be easy to use, but we also wanted that multiple users can use it at the same time, a collaborative application. So this was the menu system. You see we have here basic functions, and here you have some menus which flip out sideways. And we had a help box. This help box explained the menu functions. And it was collaborative, so one user had a blue menu, the other user had a red menu, and we had multiple users, red, green, and so on, orange. And each user worked in its own color. So the teacher could see this was constructed by the blue user, this was constructed by the red user, and so on. So it was easy for the teacher also to distinguish the contribution of the students. We did a usability evaluation in 2004. This was with 16 students. We did in summary 3 evaluations. This is just one of them. And there was one teacher working with 2 students in this environment. The students were coming 1 hour per week for 6 weeks, and they had to complete certain tasks. They got some geometry examples, and they had to perform these in the environment. So this is one of the examples. We have here a spherical cutting tool. You can see it here. And this spherical cutter is cutting out the surface. And if you want to cut such a surface, you must decide how big is the spherical cutter. And as we can see here, if this cutting tool is too big, it cuts through the surface. And so students learn here about curvature, about different properties of surfaces. And they could change the size of the cutter and adjust it until it fit. So we had a number of examples like this, but I cannot go into detail, it would go too far. I just wanted to give you an overview how we used this dynamic changing of things. And here you can see some students working in the environment. Students knelt down on the floor, or they were lying down on the floor, stepping on a chair to look into objects from above, and they really used this environment and enjoyed it very much. So the main results of this evaluation were the Construct 3D is easy to use. It requires little time to learn. After 5 minutes, students could work with the menu, and it encourages learners to try new functions, and it can be used consistently. So if you know how to use it, you know how to use all the functions. And the main findings were that this dynamic 3D geometry really helps a lot. You can study things, you can walk around things, and this is a major difference to all the projection environments. If you are using a head-mounted display, you can really walk around objects. You can lie on the floor and look at it from below. You can move around it. There is a relationship between body and object, and this also helps with spatial abilities, with perceiving size of objects, relations in the room. And the main strength was to visualize abstract problems. So ideal content for such an environment are highly dynamic examples where you really have to do something, which encourage modification, and where you can visualize abstract problems. We also found out that the examples must require students to become active. If students can construct something and just look at it, they didn't really move. So some students just constructed something and then they looked at it and were happy with it. So the task had to encourage them to change something, to move, because otherwise students just stay there, look at it, are happy. So we really must utilize, we must use this technology correctly. We must encourage them. Another project was Physics Playground. A few years later, a student of mine worked on this. And in the Physics Playground environment, students can design a 3D environment, they can load objects, or they can design their own objects. And this is basically a physical simulation. So what you can do, you have a plane, you have a ball, and you let the ball hop on the plane. These are the simple things that students do first. But in order to make this a really educational tool, we developed an analyzer. And this analyzer allows us to study properties. So we can attach an analyzing tool to an object. For example, we can connect this ball with the analyzer here, and we can study the speed of the ball. We can study acceleration, we can study forces, and so on. And this analyzer records these parameters. So let me show you an example. Here we have a wheel, a flywheel, and attached to this wheel is a handle. The sphere indicates the length of the bar, the length of the handle. And now we push with a certain force down this handle, and the wheel rotates. And now we make the handle shorter, and we push again with the same, exactly the same force. But because the handle is shorter now, the wheel rotates slower. At first, this is an observation. If we have a longer handle to apply the force, we have faster rotation. If we have a shorter handle, we have slower rotation. And now we can study, is this just an observation or is it really true? And we connect it with our analyzing tool. And here we record the speed. And we also see that because of friction, the speed accelerates. And we do the same with the shorter handle and record again the speed. And here we say, yes, it's really slower. The speed is lower on the analyzing tool. And then we could even study how does friction slow down this movement, and we can see that friction slows down here in a logarithmic way, so we get a really nice curve here, which also shows how the friction works on the wheel. Another example here is this crankshaft. We have here a simple piston which is moving back and forth, and now we are recording the speed of this piston. We open here the analyzer and we connect now this piston to the analyzer, and we can see, so let's start it again. We start now the simulation, and we get a nice sinus curve here. It gets slower at the ends and then accelerates again, it gets slower again. So with this tool we can monitor physical properties and physical parameters. And we found out that the simulation is very robust. We used NVIDIA physics tool, which is a simple game engine physics simulation. And the interesting thing was that this was accurate enough for our educational purposes. We calculated the values with the physical formulas and then compared it to the simulation. And the simulation was quite precise. So it was good enough for educational purposes. It was very motivating for students. And real-time simulation was possible. So we could pause in between, we could stop it, we can continue it, and we can study a physical experiment while it is ongoing. If we look at the constructivist theory, which says that knowledge is actively built by the learners, this was the case in Physics Playground and also in Construct 3D. Learners are actively constructing what they study. It is a collaborative process. We were able to adapt old knowledge to this new environment. Motivation was very important, of course. And it supports different learning and teaching styles. So in summary, Construct 3D and Physics Playground, the students liked it, the teachers liked it, but why is it not used in schools yet? So what are the problems here? First of all, it is difficult to prove the effectiveness of virtual and augmented reality environments. This has been a problem for many, many years. How to prove that this technology is better than anything else? Now, the problem here is that we're using a completely new learning medium. When I design an example specifically for Construct 3D, this is a dynamic example where students can change something. They walk around. I cannot do the same example in a book because it would look completely different if I did it with a book. If I design an educational video, for instance, which explains things dynamically in a 3D way, I also do it differently than if I do it in a book. And now if I would compare teaching with a book to teaching with Construct 3D, I would compare apple and oranges. They are two different things. And if I just use a book example and do it in Construct 3D, I would not use the capabilities of this technology. I would just port something one-to-one, but I wouldn't really use the technology in a good way. So it's really difficult to compare these and to find settings where I can combine different learning mediums and then study the effects. So this is one of the problems. Maybe some of you have ideas here or have worked in this direction. It would be very interesting discussion. But most importantly, we have didactical aspects and we have organizational aspects that hinder the use of these technologies in schools. So let us look at the didactical aspects. Teachers told me that teaching in such an environment is very similar to the current computer-supported teaching. In Austria, it looks like this. They have a computer room. They go with children in this room. Two children or three children are usually sitting at one computer. They work together on a problem, and the teacher goes from one team to the next team and helps them. And it's very similar in our environment. There were two students working in this environment, and the teacher went to them and helped them. The tasks that we really need to engage learners, and we require their involvement. And one of the problems that teachers mentioned that in this environment, teaching is usually done in smaller groups. Well, this is partly true. because there are hardware environments where many students can work. If we have projection environments with a stereo projection, you can have many, many students watching. You have a lot of different hardware options nowadays with projection or TV setups and different kind of controllers, so you can engage multiple users. And even with head-mounted displays, we developed an environment where 6 head-mounted displays were attached to one graphics card. So we used a Matrox triple head to go, which splits up the signal, and all these 6 students were working on one computer actually. So there are options to solve this problem, to support larger groups and more students. In addition, and what is of course true, is that there is time needed for the adaptation of content to this new learning medium. There are 2 companies, as far as I know, nowadays. I will come back to that later on. There is a German company, Visenso, and also Ion Reality in the United States, who try to develop educational material for schools and to adapt content for these learning environments. And one of the problems might be that there is a lack of ICT competence of teachers, so teachers also have to learn about these new technologies. If we look at the organizational aspects, teachers and students must have access to this infrastructure. And it must be easy to use. So if it's too complicated, teachers won't use it. If they need an instruction for many hours, they won't use it. It must be easy to use. And the most and biggest problem are the costs, of course. Technology costs money, and schools usually don't have that money. There is a missing of the financial means. Hardware costs money, software often too, and more important, if the hardware is complex, it needs maintenance and repair. In our case, we use this optical tracking system. We had these targets, and these targets can break. Someone must fix them. Someone must repair and maintain the environment, maintain the computers and so on. So one solution that some schools and these companies now try is sponsoring, that they find sponsors, big companies, who are willing to set up such an environment in schools. But let's have a closer look at the costs. When I started with Construct 3D, we needed a PC, a head-mounted display, the Sony Glastron. It was very expensive. We had this designed wireless pen. We designed it ourselves. And the most expensive part was the optical tracking system. It was an ART optical tracking system, very expensive at this time, and we had very high costs. So we looked at the costs again, and of course over the years the PC got cheaper, and we used another head-mounted display in 2007, and we had a cheaper pen solution. But what about the optical tracking? The prices did not drop after a few years. So in 2006, 2007, we started to develop our own I/O tracker optical tracking system. This was also commercially available, and we were able to build it at much lower costs with consumer hardware, and the precision was very good, millimeter precision, and we could reduce the costs. So the I/O tracker system cost 11,000 euros, which was still too expensive for schools, but it changed the market situation. So in 2007, we had costs of about 14,000 euros for this dual user setup. Usually people don't talk about costs, but costs are very important when we are designing for schools or for education, because usually there is not that much money in education. So let us look at the state of the art and future. Where are we going? First, I would like to look at augmented reality. When I talk to teachers nowadays, they often tell me that they would like to use hardware that's already available in the schools. They don't want to buy additional hardware, everything costs, and they don't have the money. And so one new piece of hardware that is available, at least in Austria, are all these devices, smartphones and tablets. So many students nowadays have smartphones or tablets, and we can use them for education, of course. especially in augmented reality. So here we come back to the magic book of Mark Billinghurst. There are companies who develop books. For example, here, you probably know this is an English company, and they have this book solution here. And the student uses camera, it can also be on a tablet, of course, and you can see things come out of the book, the books come alive. And of course we can use this for all kinds of education, mathematics education, where you see three-dimensional objects coming out of the book, formulas coming alive. So this is a very simple way to visualize things in books. My vision is also, I guess, that we will soon have 3D displays on the tablets, and then we could have the geometry coming out of the tablet and we can look at it from different directions. So there are also transparent displays now, holographic displays are in development. So these are interesting technologies that will soon come to schools. And new devices are also coming up, new augmented reality devices. There are some, I call it the Kickstarter revolution. So there are many products coming now on Kickstarter, this crowdfunding platform, where people help small companies to build interesting new products. And one of these products is this Cast AR, augmented reality glass, which projects into the environment, but there are also the space glasses. They have a very nice video. So if we had such glasses and we could use them for education, this would also be quite nice. We don't have to remember the names of our students anymore. So they have a tracking device built in here on this bar on top, which is a 3D camera, a 3D sensor which can measure the hand position in space. So it should come out, I think, in spring next year. So these are interesting devices for augmented reality. But how does it look in virtual reality? What is the state of the art here, and what could come in the next years in virtual reality? So this is a company, Eon Reality, who develops technology for schools. And
welcome to the 3D classroom. It's a well-known fact that children have different learning styles. Some are visual, some are auditory, and still others learn best with a more tactile or hands-on approach. The immersive 3D classroom, made possible by 3D DLP technology, enhances visual learning and stimulates hands-on learning in a way never before possible. Bring human anatomy to life, dissect a frog that doesn't get your hands dirty, watch as students immerse themselves in a tour through the solar system and beyond. With 3D classroom content powered by DLP technology, the possibilities are endless for improving both learning and retention, which can result in higher test scores for students at all levels.
Think, if you will, giving a lesson about the heart in a classroom, teaching it in 3D and watching the students' eyes light up. The power of a DLP projector with 3D-ready technology gives you the ability to teach content in 3D. It's available today, and more is on the horizon. With DLP projectors with 3D-ready capability, you're going to future-proof your classroom and be able to use 3D as a tool for higher learning for your kids today.
It's really interactive and exciting.
It's good because it lets you focus on the details of it.
I think it would stay in your brain more because you're having fun.
It would really help you. It would show you what it looks like in space. I thought it was brilliant. It was a really interesting way of learning.
I choose to use 3D, particularly with children, because it's the very, very best technology to use for them to understand. I think when they're using the flat technology, the book, the video, even television, it just does not explain the same way. I would like to see 3D explain the shape and the form and the concepts in all of the subject areas.
So you see that they are mainly using 3D projectors in the classroom, and this is a technology that's available today. But of course, many schools don't have 3D projectors and they are still expensive. So one idea that I had for a long time is that there are places where 3D projectors are readily available, for example in cinemas and movie theaters, and they are usually empty in the morning. So why don't we use these places to go with our students and use them for education, and to use these 3D projectors in the cinemas for educational lessons. So this is just one idea. I don't know what the problems here would be, but this might be interesting. If we come back to the costs of such an immersive system nowadays, I showed you the head-mounted displays, and optical tracking and everything is very expensive, but technology evolved over the years. So how are the costs nowadays? You probably all have heard about the Oculus Rift head-mounted displays. We have a couple at our institute, and they have a very large field of view. They are very immersive. Some people get cybersick much easier with them, very easily, but they have a very low price. So you can get them for $300, and they are really quite immersive, very impressive. And when it comes to controllers and to tracking, there is the Sony Move controller, for instance, which has very precise tracking. And one of my master students developed a library so that we can use it on the PC, and we can get tracking data of the glowing ball, and there is also an inertial sensor built in, so we can get very precise tracking data with this device. And now it's possible to build a setup consisting of such a Sony Move controller for position tracking and orientation, and the Oculus Rift display. And in addition, as a controller, you could use a Razer Hydra controller. It uses magnetic tracking, and it's also quite nice and very low cost. And if we combine all of these technologies, we could build a system with a good PC, with an Oculus head-mounted display, with the Razer Hydra controller, and with the PS Move. The camera and the controller only costs €50, and you have precise tracking. And in total, we could build a system for about €2,000 out of these components for one user. So as you can see, compared to the costs 10 years ago, this is quite a considerable drop. As far as I know, nobody uses such a system for education yet. And of course, there is no professional maintenance. It is a prototype. You don't have support. But it's an interesting system for experiments. What is the future of immersive virtual reality in education? Well, I cannot predict the future, but before I conclude, I would like to show you a project that we are working on nowadays, and it's also very interesting for education in the future. So, did you ever think about walking through the pyramids of Gizeh inside? Or walking through the Guggenheim Museum and exploring all the beautiful art objects? Or through the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, or the Vatican Museum, Sistine Chapel. And doing all of that in one day. So you would say walking through all of these places in one day is not really possible. Well, in reality, it's not possible. But in virtual reality, that's what we try to do. And a project that we're working on is called Flexible Spaces. And I would like to show the video to explain what we are doing. So in Flexible Spaces, the idea is that users want to explore very large virtual environments, like the ones I showed you before. And we don't need audio here. So we have a student here walking in a room. This is a 9 by 9 meter room, so it is a larger lab. And the student is walking in this virtual environment. Here you have a top view. And when the student is walking out of a room, a corridor is generated, and another room is generated, and these corridors are dynamically generated. They are not fixed. And the student can walk now, and he walks into the next room. He studies the objects there. This could be art objects, this could be paintings, 3D models, whatever. And when the student is finished with his task, he can leave the room and he can walk to the next room. And again, the corridor is generated. The student walks at least around 2 corners, and he walks into the next room. And the next room is again overlaid. All these rooms overlap. But because the user is walking at least over 2 corners, the user doesn't notice that these rooms overlap. So the user is thinking that he's walking in a much larger environment. Of course, there is no map for this environment. We can only show the connections, how these rooms are connected. But the user, and that's the interesting thing, they don't notice that these rooms overlap. And now we can display and visualize large virtual environments which are connected by corridors. These could be also outdoor places, small places outdoors which are connected by some corridors of hedges or so, and the students can walk around and walk along corridors. So this was a lot in the media recently, and they called it Holodeck 1.0. So it's a virtual room which allows to explore large places. In summary, I would like to conclude that in virtual environments and in augmented reality, the content development is still expensive and time-consuming. The organizational issues remain, of course, but technology advances and lowers the costs. There are new display technologies, there are new flexible input devices, and working in small and large groups is possible in this environment. The content can be taught differently than with other technologies. And in summary, of course, these technologies have very high potential for teaching and learning. Thank you very much for your attention, and I would like to ask for questions. Thank you.